Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see such a great crowd. I'm Liza Bernard from the Norwich Bookstore, and Karen and Sarah and I are very pleased you all came out tonight on this balmy fall evening. Hopefully good. First reminder is to turn off cell phones and other distracting electronic devices so they don't get in the way of listening. The format tonight, I'm going to do a brief introduction of our speakers, and then they're going to have the floor for speaking, question and answer, and then books are available on this side, and there's a lot of the new book, and there are some of the scattering of their older books. If we don't have a title you want, we're happy to order them, and then our authors are going to be sitting at this table to sign, so they're separate a little bit. We do have an incredibly full calendar of events coming up. I have a brief handout on the table there, but next Wednesday here, it's not our event, but it's the Vermont Humanities Council first lecture. Reed Lindbergh is going to be speaking, and we will have copies of her mother's book that she's speaking about. And then the next night, there's a discussion circle on the novel called The Solace of Trees at the Bookstore. And then Finn Murphy is going to be coming to town with his 18-wheeler and telling us stories about life driving long haul, and it's going to be a lot of fun. That's on the 8th. And then in December, Bill McKibben has a new novel called Radio Free Vermont. It's a novel of resistance, and that will be at the bookstore. And the wonderful writer Ann Fadiman, who wrote Spirit Catches You, You Fall Down, has written a memoir about her father, and it's called The Wine Lover's Daughter, and that will also be at the bookstore. So we encourage you to sign up for our newsletters and visit our website, and also to check out the Book Jam blog. I don't know, how many saw the interview with our guests tonight on the Book Jam blog? Oh, you got to go to the Book Jam blog. 3-question interviews they do for one of our authors every month, and it's great to get different insight into their reading habits and interests. So, from the size of the crowd tonight, it almost seems like Cy Montgomery and Elizabeth Marshall Thomas don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. Cy has written 20 books for both adults and children, and lectures and scripts for broadcast in this country and actually around the globe. And they all highlight our connection with our fellow creatures. Her work has garnered many honors, too long to list here, but they do include being a finalist for the 2015 National Book Award. That was for Soul of an Octopus. And in 2009, she was the winner of our very own New England Independent Booksellers Association Nonfiction Award. Close to home here, she developed and scripted the award-winning film about Ben Killam, if some of you may have seen. She's a graduate of Syracuse University, a triple major with dual degrees in magazine journalism and French language and literature and psychology. And she's been awarded numerous honorary degrees. She lives in Hancock, New Hampshire with her husband, the writer Howard Mansfield. Dog, sheep, hens, probably more since this was written. The New York Times described Cy as equal parts poet and scientist, while the Boston Globe said part Indiana Jones and part Emily Dickinson. Okay. And Elizabeth Marshall Thomas has written more than a dozen books, ranging from animal behavior to anthropology to fiction, also all concerned with culture and connections. She began her undergraduate studies at Smith College and earned her degree in English at Radcliffe. She's traveled incredibly widely, including exploring many regions of the African continent from the Kalahari Desert to Uganda, and gathered knowledge that would inform most of her writings. Dreaming of Lions takes us to wild places, while the New York Times bestseller, The Hidden Life of Dogs, shows us around her New Hampshire neighborhood and home. Liz lives in Peterborough, New Hampshire, just on the road a piece from Cy, with 2 dogs and 2 cats and probably some other beasts. 3 cats. 3 cats. About her, Carl Safina wrote, like a shaman of words, she connects us, as if by magic, with other worlds hidden on our own planet. Which I thought was a beautiful description.
It's very nice, yes.
So, Cy Montgomery and Elizabeth Marshall Thomas have been friends and collaborators for a long time, and they'll be telling you about that. The essays in Tamed and Untamed, published by our very own local press, Chelsea Green, which makes me very happy, are mostly collected and adapted from a column they wrote for the Boston Globe. And one more quote from somebody else, Becque, who's the author of the wonderful Elephant Company. She writes in the incredibly welcoming introduction to this book that the understanding Cy and Liz bring to their love of fellow creatures includes the deep and kind understanding of fellow humans. And it is that unique understanding that shows up in the essays in Tamed and Untamed. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth and Cy.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. And this really is a celebration for me and Liz, and I can think of no better place than right here, right down the street from our publisher and our editor, who has also been a friend of ours for over 20 years. So, and I see a lot of friends in the audience right now, but I hope by the end of the evening we'll all feel like friends, because this is really an effort that grew out of the greatest friendship I've enjoyed in my life with Liz Thomas. And I want to share with you how this came about. When I first moved to New Hampshire, which was 32 years ago last month, I had just spent 6 months living in a tent in the outback. I'd been studying emus. I was not paid. I'd quit a perfectly good paying job with insurance to go do that. Everyone had told me I was insane. But I had an opportunity to study an animal that everyone knew but no one knew about. So how could I not? Well, after 6 months of living in the wild in a tent, I'd become pretty feral, as my husband had noticed. I had a big knot in the back of my hair, like a dog gets if you don't brush it. And when I came home, home was a new place. We'd moved all of our stuff from where we had been living before I left in New Jersey, where I had a perfectly good job at a newspaper. And my husband, Howard, who's a better author than I am, he actually had a book contract right out of college. He had moved all of our stuff to this little carriage house in New Hampshire, but we knew no one. Well, the local paper had an interesting article in it one day, and he cut it out and showed it to me. It was about this woman who lived in the next town over, Peterborough, New Hampshire. And it was about how she, with 2 other researchers, had discovered that elephants use sounds below the threshold of human hearing to communicate over vast distances. And this was Liz Thomas, who had done this with her very good friend Katie Payne, whose work on humpback whales some of you may know. Well, Howard said to me, "You've got to meet this woman." Well, I happened to have a column at the time with a newspaper called the New Hampshire Times, so I had a good reason to call up Elizabeth Marshall Thomas and say, "Hey, can I come over and do an interview with you? I'd like to write a column about you." I did not know at that time, there was no internet, I didn't realize that Liz Thomas had already written a National Book Award finalist book before I could stand or read. In the 1950s, she had gone to Namibia with her parents. The Marshall comes from the Marshall expedition, the very first group of people to study hunter-gatherers anywhere for any length of time. And Liz was one of the 4 Marshalls who did this. And her beautiful book, The Harmless People, came out of this book about the Bushmen, or now called the San. Shortly after that, She got married, had 2 kids, and lugged them all to Uganda, where she studied the Dadath, another group of folks who no one had written anything about, and dragged her kids through all kinds of leopard-infested areas, and managed to tell Idi Amin that while she would love to help him out, no, she could not dispose of that body. She just had all these adventures before I even met her. If I had known it, I might have been too scared to come. But the minute we started talking about elephants and other animals, the minute I met her dogs and cats, I could see that here was somebody who was like heart of my heart, who totally felt, as I did, that animals are individuals whose thoughts and feelings and memories all matter. And by the end of the interview, we were already fast enough friends that when I mentioned I had some ferrets at home as pets, she wanted to come and meet them. And so I said, when? And she said, now. So we got in the car, and here was the thing about our ferrets. When I left New Hampshire to live with the emus in the tent, I had, I think, 5 or 6 ferrets. When I came back, I had like 12 or 15 ferrets. And they weren't staying with my husband, they were staying with a mutual friend who quickly discovered that although the ferrets were adorable, she was violently allergic to them. So all the new baby ferrets who were born, she wasn't handling them. So when Liz put her hand into the ferret cage, she withdrew her hand with a ferret on the end of one finger. And I said, you know, I'm so sorry. She said, oh, I don't mind at all. I don't care that a weasel bit my hand. So, of course, I felt like this person is going to be my BFF. And in fact, she has been. And we have always been each other's first readers ever since. I have read everything that she has written before the editors. She has read everything that I've written before the editors. I'm not in her Paleolithic novels, but I'm in every other non-fiction book that she has written, and she is in every single one of mine, either quoted for her wisdom or as a character. She's one of the main characters in my book, The Good, Good Pig, which is about Christopher Hogwood, a member of my family who just happened to have a flat nose disc and a curly tail. And she's also in The Soul of an Octopus. She was one of the first people to meet Octavia, one of my favorite octopuses, and she recently came with me to New England Aquarium to meet the octopus named in my honor, Cy. So we've traveled together to Costa Rica on bat conservation international trips. We most recently, last summer, went together to Tanzania with our friend Dick Estes, who was 89, the world's top expert on wildebeest for a book that I'm now writing. And I don't think I could have done anything in my life without you, Liz. I don't think I could get out of bed in the morning. She's been there for the bringing home and the deaths of so many pets. She's been there for me for the deaths of both of my parents. She was the first person to meet our new puppy, Thurber. And it is such an honor to have a book with both of our names on it, published by our dear friend, Joni Praded. So it is such a treat to share this with you. And first, I wanted to show you something special, and Liz is going to help model this. This isn't merch, we're not selling them, but take a look at this. And this was made for us by our good friend Nancy Folsom, who is also wearing one in the audience. But I'm getting hot, so I'm taking mine off after displaying it. Anyway, I thought we would start by reading. And would you like to? Do I usually read first, or do you?
Either way, but I think you did the. I think you.
Okay. I'm gonna read first. Then Liz is going to talk a little and read a little, and we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A because we really want to talk with you all. Well, this book is a book about animals' thoughts and feelings, our relationships with them. Both of us have felt from the start that animals have so much to teach us, that probably the most exciting thing that any of us can ever do is be with an animal. And we're hoping that each one of these essays shares some of that excitement with you. One of the things that has always annoyed us, and for years, it's getting better now, but for many years, animals were always called it, never he or she. Even if it just laid an egg, it was turned into an it. It's so great to have an editor who doesn't do this. We have a whole section on animal abilities, because animals have many of the abilities that we do, plus all these others, like infrasound and echolocation. And it's so funny that for many years, people denied that animals had many of the mental facilities that we do. So this particular essay is called Do Animals Dream? The electric eel exhibit at New England Aquarium has a feature that makes it a favorite. Whenever the eel is hunting or stunning prey, the charge powers a voltmeter above his tank. It lights up when the eel is using his electricity and allows you to see the invisible, almost like magic. One day, I saw another magical thing happen in the tank. Thanks to the voltmeter, I was able to watch the eel dream. It happened when I was standing in front of the exhibit with Scott Dowd, the lead aquarist for the freshwater gallery. We were watching the eel resting motionless at the bottom of the tank. I think he's asleep, I said to my companion. Yes, that eel is catching some serious Z's, he agreed. But being hardcore fish enthusiasts, we continued to watch transfixed while the eel slept. But that's when it happened. A big flash shot across the voltmeter display, and then another and another. Electric eels hunt while swimming forward, wagging their heads to and fro, sending out signals that bounce back to them, sort of like a dolphin's echolocation. But the eel was still motionless. What was the flash for? I thought the eel was asleep, I said to Scott. He is asleep, he replied. We realized at once what we were almost surely witnessing. The electric eel was dreaming. It would appear that not only do men dream, Aristotle wrote in History of Animals, but horses also, and dogs and oxen, sheep and goats. It was obvious. Like most of us, Aristotle had watched sleeping dogs twitch their ears and paddle their paws and bark in their sleep. Surely other animals dreamed as well. But since Aristotle's day, more modern thinkers denied that animals could dream. Complex and mysterious, dreams were considered the exclusive province of so-called higher minds. But as brain research advanced, researchers were forced to concede that Aristotle was right. Animals do dream, and now we're even able to glimpse what they dream about. Since the 1960s, scientists have understood that our dreams happen during the rapid eye movement period of sleep. And during this time, our muscles are normally paralyzed by the pons of the brainstem, so we don't act out our dreams. In 1965, researchers removed the pons of the brainstems of cats. And they discovered that the cats would get up, walk around, move the head as if to follow prey, and pounce on invisible mice, all while asleep. By 2007, we'd get an even more vivid picture of animals' dreams. MIT researchers recorded the activity of rats' brains while the animals were running a maze. Neurons fire in distinct patterns while a rat in a maze performs particular tasks. The researchers repeatedly saw the exact same patterns reproduced while the rats slept. And they saw this so clearly, they could tell what point in the maze the rat was dreaming about, and whether he was running or walking in his dreams. The rat's dreams arose from the hippocampus, the same area in the brain that seems to drive humans' dreams. It's an area known to record and store memories, and that supports the notion that one important function of dreams is to help us remember what we've learned. And of course, it's important to a lab rat to remember his maze. So if rats remember running in mazes in their dreams, what do you think birds are dreaming about? Singing. University of Chicago professor Daniel Margoliouth conducted experiments on zebra finches. Like most birds, zebra finches aren't born knowing the song of their species. They learn them, and young birds spend a lot of time rehearsing their songs. While awake, neurons in the forebrain record particular notes, and you can see this on a machine, which note and which notes the bird is singing. When the birds were asleep, the researchers recorded the neurons firing in the exact same order as when they were awake. Now, less work has been done on fish than on mammals and birds, but it is known that fish sleep. We know this because if you wake up zebrafinches, if they're deprived of sleep, because pesky researchers keep waking them up, they have trouble swimming the next day, just like you or I would after a dreamless sleep. Well, what would an electric eel dream about? The voltmeter at the New England Aquarium showed us the answer: hunting and shocking prey.
First, I would like to thank Sally for the nice things she says about me. I didn't take part, I took part in the elephant discovering infrasound, but it was Katie Payne who discovered it. I just went along to help, kind of, but I was there, so that was and I can't say enough about Sally. She's absolutely a wonderful friend. The luckiest thing that ever happened to me was to meet Sally. This essay is called The Death of a Dog. One of the most devastating experiences we can have is the death of a beloved dog whose loyalty we never questioned, who loved us all her life, protecting us, helping us, as close to us as any family member, sometimes closer. A dog lives for about 15 years, whereas her owner may live 80 or 90 years and experience this terrible loss multiple times. It gets no easier. Some of us then get another dog. The new dog does not replace the dog who died. Nothing could do that. But as is true with friends and family, our circle of love expands without limit. The new dog is wonderful too. We're charmed, and quickly we become devoted. All this is normal. And then, after much too short a time, we lose that dog as well. As before, we struggle to move on just as we would if the loved one was a person. But for a person, there's an obituary in the paper, also visiting hours at the funeral home, followed by the funeral or memorial service and the burial in sanctified ground. Our grief is understood and honored. Gifts to charitable organizations are made in our loved one's name. Letters of sympathy fill our mailbox. Flowers arrive at our home. More flowers are placed on the grave. And sometimes a monument is erected or something important is named for the deceased. But if the dog dies, nothing. Our mourning isn't acknowledged. We don't get a few days off from work. No flowers are involved, and there is no funeral. The burial is performed by us personally, perhaps alone with only a shovel and our tears. Others will sympathize, of course, but it's we who concern them. They don't mourn for the dog. So a dog is like a body part, as important to us as our arms or legs. If we're in the bathroom taking a shower and our dog comes in to be together, we are no more embarrassed by her presence than we are by the presence of our legs. But if a person comes in, we might grab a towel, the intruder would back out quickly, and a torrent of apologies would follow. The intruder should have knocked, the door should have been latched, and so on. Thus, losing a dog is like losing a leg. This would change our lives, and our family and friends would be deeply sympathetic, but we alone would miss the leg itself, and our supporters wouldn't know or care what happened to it. We all know where people are buried or what happened to their ashes, but how many of us know what happened to the bodies of other people's dogs? After the loss, we're very much alone. Most of us don't talk about it. Instead, we keep the dog in our hearts, thinking of her when passing the places where we walked together, missing her warmth when she slept beside us, looking at her bowl, now dry and empty on the kitchen floor. Thomas Hardy wrote a poem after the death of his dog, Wessex, which begins, "Do you think of me at all, wistful ones? Do you think of me at all as if nigh?" The poem doesn't end well. The dog speaks the last lines. "Should you call us when I knew you, I shall not listen to you, shall not come." The dog won't come because he can't, but the answer to his question is an emphatic yes. Do we think of you at all? We don't stop. We say your name when we're alone as if you could hear us. We remember the first time we saw you and the last time too, that moment when we knew you were gone. The afterlife becomes a question. Some people say that animals go to heaven, while others say they don't. If I arrived in an afterworld and saw only people, I'd know for a fact that my sins had caught up with me, because no place like that could be heaven and only humans go to hell. But I'm not sure there is an afterlife as we imagine it. So I keep the ashes of my dogs with instructions to mix them with mine and put us in the woods. We will then be together until the end of time, at least in molecular form. That's not much, to be sure, but it's something.
Liz's Hidden Life of Dogs, I think, is one of the most moving and perceptive books ever written about dogs. But I want to share with you the fact that that book was almost lost on a trail in Costa Rica years ago, except for me. It's probably my greatest literary achievement. Here's what happened. We were on that Bat Conservation International trip that I was telling you about a little while ago. And of course, you know, you want to see bats, you're out at night. So we were out on this little twisty trail, mist-netting bats, and walked back after having seen all the bats. We were getting back in the vehicle, and I noticed Liz's backpack was unzipped, and what had fallen out of it was her spiral-bound notebook with all her handwritten notes for what would become the hidden life of dogs. So we went back on the trail in the dark and got that. It was then called Dogs of Cambridge, Mass., and got renamed The Hidden Life of Dogs. And I got to tell you, it was such a thrill when that thing became a huge bestseller that it did. We had the same editor at the time, Peter Davison. And Liz saved one of my books, too. I'm going to quickly tell you about that. My very first book was called Walking with the Great Apes, and it was a story of the relationships that Jane Goodall, Dian Fossey, and Baruti Galdikas had with their study animals, and how these relationships transformed their understanding of these animals and transformed the study of ethology. Well, I had gone to Borneo to do some field work. I'd been to Canada, and I think I'd gone also to England at that point, and then came home and found out that my publisher was no longer publishing trade books, i.e. they weren't going to publish my book. I had no publisher. This was my first book. This was horrendous. But Liz Thomas was having her editor over for lunch, and I think she just held a fork to his neck and made him read my book proposal, and that was Peter Davison, and he published that book. Houghton Mifflin published that first book, and that really was the start of my literary career, certainly as an author, thanks to Liz. Anyway, one more entry from our book, and it's also going to be from, God, you can never find the thing when you want it. It's just within pages here. Okay. This is me raising a glass to toast you tonight for celebrating us. It's called Animals Who Imbibe. What's the cheapest beer you sell? My husband asked with an air of urgency at the state liquor store. We weren't college students planning a keg party. It wasn't New Year's Eve. The beer wasn't even for human consumption. The beer in question was for our pig. We discovered Christopher Hogwood's fondness for beer his first summer as a piglet. My husband had been enjoying a cold one and offered Chris a taste. It turned out Christopher loved the stuff. Soon, whenever the pig saw anyone holding a bottle, he'd chase them until they surrendered and suck it dry. This could prove quite intimidating once Hogwood topped 750 pounds. Keeping our pig in his favorite beverage, my husband became a familiar figure to the beer guys at the store. Each time he'd come in, they'd ask how much Christopher weighed now, and with great interest tried to figure out how much he could drink before he became disorderly. Even if our beer budget could have answered the question, we did not want a 750-pound pig with sharp tusks wandering around the yard tipsy. Christopher never got drunk, but plenty of other animals do. Harris Center for Conservation Education Science Director Brett Amy Thalen told me about the black bear who ransacked campers' coolers and, with teeth and claws, punctured and drank 36 cans of Rainier beer before passing out in a tree at the Baker Lake Resort in Washington State. He drank 1 can of Busch, but then went back to his favorite brand. His preference was so strong that when the Fish and Wildlife Department had to relocate him, they baited the trap with the usual donuts and honey, but also added, you guessed it, Rainier beer. And they caught him. When I spoke with her, Thalen had been researching intoxication in the animal kingdom in preparation for a talk as part of the center's popular series, Nature on Tap. Some of the stories she's heard are apocryphal. Elephants don't get drunk on rotting fruit lying on the ground. That one was debunked by a University of Bristol study. Elephants eat the fruit off the tree before it has time to ferment. But birds can and do get drunk from eating fermented fruit, she told me. And the problem was so severe among Bohemian waxwings feasting on rotting mountain ash berries that one year, in the capital of Canada's Yukon Territories, the local environmental agency had to set up a drunk tank. Actually, it was a plastic hamster cage where people could bring birds who needed to sleep it off. Birds purposely impair their nervous systems in this way. Well, they're not getting drunk on purpose. They're just trying to eat a whole lot of fruit for the winter, and that winter there was a glut of berries. The birds were essentially poisoned by what looked like good, healthy food, but which had fermented. But interestingly, other animals seem to seek out intoxicating substances for the same, sometimes complex, sometimes stupid, and occasionally edifying reasons that we do. Thalen and I traded some more stories because I had a few of my own. Ever hear of courage in a bottle? Well, apparently, the colorful baboons known as mandrills know just where to find it. In the journal Animals and Psychedelics, it really is a journal, this researcher, Giorgio Samarini, reported that in Gabon, in Africa, a male mandrill will often prepare for combat with another male by eating the root of a particular plant, the iboga plant. He waits 2 hours for the drug to take effect, and then he attacks his rival. The fact that the mandrill waits like this, the author writes, demonstrates a high level of awareness of what he's doing. Feeling rejected by the opposite sex? Well, apparently certain fruit flies respond by drowning their sorrows in booze. University of California neuroscientists allowed some male fruit flies to mate with females, but placed others with females who'd already mated, so they weren't interested. Those who were sexually rejected were 4 times more likely to choose food vials containing alcohol than flies who'd had success with the ladies. And then some animals may simply be experimenting with intoxication to experience an alternate reality. A BBC film team recently filmed groups of young bottlenose dolphins playing with a particular species of poisonous pufferfish. Each dolphin would gently squeeze the fish in his or her mouth and cause the fish to release a hallucinogenic toxin. Then the dolphin would pass the fish to a neighbor, almost like a person passing a joint. And afterwards, the dolphins would stare at the water's surface as if mesmerized by their reflection.
This one is called How Best to Educate a Dog. We humans don't learn our behavior from dogs, but dogs must learn theirs from humans. Humans and their elders live in a house where the elders and the youngsters are a family. They speak the same language, they understand one another, and the elders teach the youngsters what to do. But a dog brought to that house is a stranger. He can't understand the language. If he stayed with his parents and his siblings, he'd belong to a pack where he could learn from his elders, but in the new house, he's a loner. Most dogs accept their owners as their elders and learn from them as best they can, but often it's a struggle. Does a cow learn easily from a horse? I've lived with my dogs for more than 50 years and found, not surprisingly, that they learn best from other dogs. During those 50 years, I kept a dog culture going. They saw themselves as a pack. The young dogs learned from their elders, and the results, including their housebreaking skills, were perfection. The science of all this is swirling in my head. My story will prove that our best trainers are our own kind. It's not that I didn't train my dogs, but I'd train one at a time and only for fun. I had a little tool that made a click, and when the dog did something special, I'd snap the clicker and give the dog a treat. They loved it. They'd beg to do it, they'd leap around with excitement when we'd start, and they'd joyfully try all kinds of things, bark, jump, lie down, roll over, whirl around on hind legs, and so on, until they'd hear the click and get the treat. I'd say sit if the dog sat, or roll over if she rolled over, so she'd do the same thing again if asked, even without a treat, because she associated the process with such pleasure. Clicker training is fun, but really just a game, and isn't much use for addressing negative behavior. To housebreak a dog by this method, one would need to catch the dog making a mistake, click the clicker, and instead of giving the reward, give him maybe an electric shock. But when pack dogs learn from their elders, their housebreaking skills come easily. They understand what their elders want them to do, and they do it without even wondering about it. For us, this pack training ended when the last dog of our 50-year culture died. After pulling myself together, I went to the local shelter and found 2 little dogs I've mentioned in earlier essays, a small pug type named Kafka and a little chihuahua named Chopek. Kafka understood housebreaking, but Čapek did not. And because these dogs were like siblings, not like a mature dog and a young dog, Čapek saw no need to copy Kafka when relieving himself. As far as he could tell, his pack and his elders were people and cats. All of them lived indoors, all of them relieved themselves indoors, and the obvious place to relieve oneself was in the house. Čapek would often pee near a cat box or a toilet. Of course, I tried the recommended training methods, confining the dog or keeping him on a leash, taking him outside often and praising and rewarding success. But he cried if confined and didn't understand about the leash, and even after I gave up on these tools, keeping only the rewards, he still didn't really get the picture. Often enough, I'd find a stain on the leg of a chair or on one of my boots in the closet, or notice him innocently lifting his leg against the umbrella stand as if he found this normal. He'd acknowledge his mistakes only if I saw him make them. So I tried puppy pads, the canine version of incontinence pads used in hospitals. These worked well enough to some degree. He may have used them in his former home, and at night they were safer than a trip outside. A great horned owl who lives in our vicinity had floated silently out of the sky to capture and kill someone else's chihuahua. I don't know how small that chihuahua was, but mine is smaller than a cat, and he's black, so in the dark he's invisible to a human, and to the owl would look like a skunk, a common prey of large owls, which is why these owls sometimes smell bad. Even on a leash, which my chihuahua didn't understand or like, he wasn't always visible. Many months passed while he used the pads, but too often he'd miss and leave a mess on the floor. He meant well, but if such a thing happens and a human doesn't notice and clean it up quickly, the house soon smells like a latrine. No wonder his first owner got rid of him. But that may have been for the best. By this time, many an owner might be punishing the dog severely, but I would never do that. So remembering how well young dogs learn from mature dogs, I looked forward to a visit from my daughter, her husband, and their elderly chihuahua, Boots, whose housebreaking was perfection. Čapek thought the world of Boots. Wherever Boots went, Čapek would follow, noticing where Boots relieved himself, even if Boots was just leaving a message, and Čapek would lift his leg to overmark, perhaps to remind Boots that he wasn't the only chihuahua present, or perhaps to reinforce the message. By the time both dogs were back in the house, Čapek had nothing left to mark with, and I felt we were getting somewhere. After Boots and his family went home, Čapek rarely lifted his leg in the house until after the first snowfall. He had never seen snow and was reluctant to go out in it. He weighed only 9 pounds, his fur was thin, and his feet, which were the size of dimes, would freeze when he stepped in wet snow. I bought him clothes and boots, but he hated them and would run away and hide if he saw them. Thus he saw the house as an acceptable winter bathroom, no matter how hard I scrubbed or how widely I spread deodorizer, and would acknowledge his mistakes only if I saw him make them. With time, things improved. He'd learned something from Boots, and praise, rewards, and attention reinforced this. He still makes mistakes, but not often, and by now I consider him trained, or trained enough, if not as well as my earlier dogs who were trained by their wonderful elders. How many hours went into his training? I can't count them. How many hours did my older dogs take to train younger dogs? None. They didn't even train them. They just did what they did, and the younger dogs copied them, and all this in minutes, no puppy pads, no mistakes to clean up, everything easy and natural. This can be considered a scientific fact, and I offer my own habits as evidence. I was trained by my parents, my grandparents, and the nanny, those who would have been my pack members if we were dogs. Today, when in a house, I use the bathroom and only the bathroom, then only the toilet, never the floor. And when I'm outside, I never pee just anywhere but only in the woods when on a hike. Chopek now knows about being outdoors, but doesn't always. I've often been told that Chihuahuas are hard to train, but I knew this already, and it doesn't explain why my skill has been spectacular, and Chopek's has been moderate to mild. I learned from conspecifics and he didn't. That's what explains it. People were not his conspecifics. Kafka and Boots were not the right conspecifics. The members of my pack were humans, and so were his. That's the secret.
Okay. Are we on? We'd love to talk with you all if you have any questions about this book, about our work, about any of the animals that we've worked on. Now's the time. Do we have any? Oh my gosh, it can't be that we've answered every question that anyone could possibly ask. How about, does anyone want to know? Oh, great, thank you.
Is it, do you find it harder to lose a dog than a cat? It's been in your household. We've resisted over the years getting dogs partly because nobody's home during the day to watch over them. But the other thing would be, it just seems like the way a dog bonds with a human, it would be a lot more traumatic to lose a dog. So we're sort of putting that off until we're tired of getting a dog. And cats, we've lost many and took it hard, but I get the feeling that it would be harder with a dog.
Well, Liz, you've had more cats than I have.
That very well could be so.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry.
Whether it's harder to, is it harder to lose a dog than a cat? And it's very hard to lose a cat, but my cats, for instance, they go outside in the daytime. I try to keep them in at night. They don't hunt birds, incidentally. Cats specialize, and my cats hunt mice and voles. But now and then, I mean, over the years, they've been attacked by some wild animal at night, or they went away and didn't come home at night or something, and you lose those cats. And you feel very bad, but for some reason, the dog is with you more, and the dog is, you feel very bad to lose a cat, but a dog is like losing, it can be like losing part of yourself for the most, to many people, it's just as important as losing a much-loved family member, like, or one's closest friend, and so I think probably it's harder to lose a dog. But it still can be very hard to lose a cat. I mean,
Yeah, when I lost Tess, I lost Tess shortly after I lost Christopher Hogwood, my pig. And so I lost both my mammals at that time. And my hair fell out, and my gums bled, and my memory was shot. It was like I had brain damage. But I've got to say, another wonderful editor that I work with at Houghton Mifflin, when she lost her cat, she had the same kind of reaction that I did. But, you know, better to have loved and lost. So whatever species gets to live with you is going to be a lucky animal. Yes?
How did you get interested in octopuses?
Oh, well, the question was, how did I get interested in octopuses? This was the book that I did before this. And there's an essay on octopuses in this book. I've always, whenever I've gone to aquarium and looked at the octopus, I felt like the octopus was looking back at me to a degree that I haven't necessarily felt with other animals at the aquarium. They seem very soulful. And throughout my career, I've been aware, as you know, a naturalist, that most animals on the planet are not vertebrates like you and me, or dogs and cats, or cows or horses, but invertebrate animals. And that most animals on the planet don't live on the land like you and me, but they live in the sea. So I kept thinking throughout, as I wrote book after book after book, one day I need to write about marine invertebrates. And finally, in 2011, I felt ready to take that on. And who to write about? Who better than an octopus, this animal that I had always been interested in. So it was a match made in heaven. And I've got to say, the moment that I felt that first octopus reaching for me, looking me in the eye, someone I just met, someone who's like gelatinous with no bones whatsoever, someone whose brain is a ring around their neck and who tastes with their skin and has a beak like a parrot and venom like a snake and can shoot ink like an old-fashioned pen. Someone that unlike me looks me in the face, turns color with emotion, and reaches out of the water with her arms and her sensitive suckers and covers my skin with these tasting organs. How could I not write a book about that?
After my office mate and I finished reading The Soul of the Octopus, I quickly called up to Middlebury because we wanted to go up and see the octopus at Middlebury.
Yeah.
And when I finally got through, the first thing they said was, "Oh, you must just have read Simon." We've had octopuses for a very long time and no one has wanted to see them.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, actually, some aquariums have added octopus encounters to the programs that they offer. So, the octopus ministry has been very successful. But, it's the same message that Liz and I are trying to get across in all of our work, and it's meant to, enlarge our circle of compassion. If you can enlarge it to someone that different from us, maybe we can even start to be compassionate for people who are different from us. Who knows? Yes. Oh, yeah.
Have you ever met an animal with a personality you didn't particularly like?
Boy, yeah, I don't think I've ever met an animal whose personality I didn't like. I don't think. Of course, I've met a mosquito that almost killed me. People often ask, like, oh, what's the most dangerous animal you ever encountered? Liz has been stalked by leopards. I've got to get her to tell you about the time the lions came and looked at her. But the most dangerous animal you're ever going to meet is going to be a mosquito. And that's the only time I almost died on any of my trips, was when I had dengue fever in Borneo. But Liz, you've got to tell that story, would you?
Yes. Can you hear me? The microphones are different. Yes. Okay. We were in what was then Southwest Africa. The interesting thing, there were two populations. The apex predators were the hunter-gatherers and the lions. They hunted the same game. They had the same idea of somebody stays with the children while we go out, and the lions do that too. There was no surface water. All the water was in water holes, and every water hole there were 8 permanent and 7 impermanent. We had a 6,000 square mile area. Was the area in question, and each water hole had a pride of lions and a group of people living at it. Again, they hunted the same game in the same way. They were both stealth hunters. The lion's charge is about the same length as an arrow, a poison arrow. And the very interesting thing was that the lions did not hunt people, and people didn't hunt any predator, but the lions didn't hunt them. And I believe the reason, nobody's done any work on this except me, but I believe the reason is that if one group made life impossible or difficult the last thing about it is that they did the same thing, used the same landscape in exactly the same way. The lions did it at night. The people one group had made life too difficult for the other group, one group would have to move. And the people had a very strongly connected society. They were very, very strongly connected with each other. And their whole culture was based on being, on keeping the social connections. And the Lions didn't have that. So if the Lions went to try to take another waterhole, the two groups would fight. Whoever won would get the water, and the other would have to go. So, and they hadn't been, I don't know, it's hard to estimate how many hundreds of thousands of years this truce persisted. Because in other places, lions prey on people regularly, and they have been doing that since people came out of the trees. Excuse me. And anyway, we were often looked at by lions. One night we were traveling and we were very tired. We didn't bother. We just got out of the trucks and just slept in our sleeping bags on the ground. And during the night, a group of lions came. They walked all around us. They stood next to us and looked down at us. And we could tell that in the morning from their tracks. But they didn't touch us. Lions will do that. When something new comes into their area, they want to know what it is. And if it's a truck, which they would have never seen before, we were the first non-Bushmen to go there. They had never seen that before. And of course they'd want to know what it was. Leopards preyed on people. Hyenas preyed on people, sometimes. But lions didn't. And that's I think a very important thing, which it would be great if I've written about it and wrote papers about it and stuff, but no scientific work was ever done on it. Not that they could. I mean, it's gone now, completely gone. Completely gone.
How have you chosen the animals that you write about in your books?
I'm sorry?
How did you choose the animals you write about in your books?
Mostly chance. I mean, dogs, they're easy to find, and cats. Just whatever is there, I guess, would be the answer.
For me, it was very deliberate. The first book I wrote was a tribute to the women who were my inspiration, my heroines. And I also thought that was a book that might be easy to sell because chimps and gorillas and orangutans are such close relatives to humans. You can get a blood transfusion from a chimp, and there was a lot of interest in women in science. So I thought, here's a book that is a tribute. As my first effort, I want to make a tribute to these women who meant so much to me, and two, I might be able to sell the thing. So the next book, I wanted to continue looking at our relationships with animals, so I wrote about relationships with predators, and I picked a place in India where the tigers will swim out after your boat like a dog chasing a car and get on board and eat you. And they eat hundreds of people a year, and yet the people do not hunt the tigers. So it was kind of a truce, like what Liz was talking about, except it was a one-way truce. I saw my first pink dolphins when I was there because there are pink dolphins in the Ganges, and I wrote about pink dolphins in South America, in the Amazon, as my next book. And then you just start meeting people, and the next thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing. Often, and then I do a whole series of kids' books too, and they have their own format, and I kind of know who's going to be a good person. One of the people that I wrote about, I was doing a book talk at her zoo. This is Dr. Lisa Becque, and at that point, she was at the zoo in Rhode Island Roger Williams Park Zoo. She invited me to meet the tree kangaroos before I gave my talk and see the zoo. I never got beyond Paul the tree kangaroo. For the rest of the afternoon, I was so enchanted, and I ended up going with her to Papua New Guinea to radio collar these little-known animals. But that was one of the most exciting expeditions of my whole life, and that was how one book literally led to another one. Anyway, so on and so forth. So, yes.
Of all of the animals that you have studied, do you find some characteristics that are the same, or the responses amongst all of the animals?
That was an excellent question. Did folks hear that? And in all the animals that you've studied, have you found that there's some responses that are the same all the way across taxa, all the way across all of the animals? And I would say yes, beyond a doubt. That's an excellent question. And in fact, there's a neurochemical basis to this. The octopus psychologist who I consulted, she's actually a psychologist in Canada. She's very well known for octopus cognition, points out that no matter what species you look at, if you look at the neurotransmitters, the chemical changes in our brains, in our blood, the hormones like oxytocin, stress hormones like cortisol, no matter which one you study, if you find it in a person, every time they've looked for it in an animal, they've found it, including oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, you know, that you've heard about. This is what makes us love our babies instead of throw them out the window. You know, the reason we don't is oxytocin. It also facilitates, you know, falling in love with your mate and being friends with your friends. Well, octopuses are generally very solitary. They do not give birth. They lay eggs. There is almost no maternal care, except the mother with her last breath will kind of push her hatchling infants out of the lair and then she dies. And yet there is a hormone so like our oxytocin, it's called cephalotocin, and that's in a creature that is separated from us by 500 million years. So, do you have anything to add to that? Do we?
A lady here had a question.
I was just going to say, how do you feel about zoos?
About
Zoos. In other words, where animals are kept in cages.
there's a big controversy about zoos going on at the moment, and I mean it has been for quite a while. It depends on the animal, and it depends on the individual really. Zoos are disastrous for some. I did a study of circus tigers, captive tigers. The circus tigers liked their job. People have had such an outcry against circus tigers that the circuses now don't have tigers. God knows what happens to those hundreds of tigers who were trained, and now there's no use for them. They're dead, I'm sure. But at the time, the tigers, in Hawthorne Corporation, there's a lot of captive tigers. The tigers, they like their training, they like the trainer or the person who's they were fine with him. They greet him when he came to see them, and their lives were, they lived in cages, but they could see a lot. There was a huge barn, and they could see all around the barn and so forth, and they knew an awful lot, those tigers. And there were maybe 50 of them in there. I could go on and on about how they were. The tigers in the zoos at the time were bored to death, and they would just lie there. There was one scientist was doing a study of tigers. I forget what the study was about, but he had laboratory tigers, and they liked their life, believe it or not. They lived. They were healthier. They lived longer. He said this is also true of circus tigers because they had something to do. at. They could see things and watch things. And a cat will watch for a long, long time, as we all know. Cats are very good at watching, and they like to watch. And so what was going on in the laboratory, the tigers would watch with interest. And there were, I don't have the kind of the math of this the way Sai does for the chemicals, hormones and stuff. But the tigers who were not in zoos were okay, so to speak. And so why don't you say what you said about the hyenas?
Oh yeah, you know, we were having this exact discussion as we were driving up here. We were talking about animals and zoos. So we're all like very in tune with you guys. It depends on the individual, depends on the zoo, it depends on the species. But I just did a book on hyenas, which is coming out in the spring. And Kay Holkamp, who has studied wild hyenas for almost as long as Jane Goodall has studied her chimps, has found that half of the baby hyenas born in the wild, in her longest and largest study of hyenas ever, half of those animals are dead by age 2. It is a very hard life. Now, if you're a high-ranking hyena, you can have a great life. It's almost like, you know, you're born in America to the president of some university versus you're born in Calcutta to a low-ranking caste. So in a great zoo with attentive people, if you're a species that can be, that can live in that area, you may have a much better life there in captivity. And for hyenas, that is certainly true. Hyenas can live more than 20 years in captivity, and a baby hyena born in captivity is almost guaranteed to be able to live. They won't have to worry about getting beaten up. They won't have to worry about being eaten. They won't worry about rival clans bothering them or lions killing them. Octopuses in captivity, I often am asked about this. There's 100,000 baby octopuses that hatch out of every clutch of eggs that a mother octopus lays. 2 of those are going to survive. Everyone else is going to be eaten alive. And there's a fishery for these animals. And in many places, it is perfectly legal for a person to take a little baby octopus and throw it into boiling oil, or eat it alive at your table, you know? So isn't it much better for that octopus to live in an interesting tank, you know, where it's got stuff to do, and it's got somebody designing toys for it, and it's got veterinary care? I mean, it's much better than being, you know, fried in oil. So, but there are some animals that don't do well in captivity. But, you know, I think it's kind of a case of, you know, we were talking about elephants, for example. Elephants are very large animals, and they're used to living in large groups and covering large pieces of land. So it is hard to keep an elephant happy in captivity. However, if an elephant has grown up with a certain group of elephants and people in a zoo, is it better to, you know, take that animal out of its family and send it back to Africa? I mean, maybe not. So it's a case-by-case thing. My dad was a prisoner of war in World War II. He was captured by the Japanese and on the Bataan Death March and survived. So I do think a lot about captivity and what conditions are like if you're captive. And conditions really matter. And I'm really glad to see that a lot of zoos and aquariums now have enrichment manuals telling you what to do to keep your animals from being bored. Liz is exactly right. The biggest problem in captivity for animals almost across the board is being bored.
I would just add that I forgot to say that the zoo tigers live much shorter lives than the circus tigers. That for one thing. I don't know why, but I mean, they obviously got fed and whatever in the zoo. Zoos, I would say zoos that are aware of an animal's needs, it can be a good place for some kinds of animals, not always elephants, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I'm really interested in your comment that cats specialize, and that you had a cat that only went for mice and moles, given that cats are such a disaster vis-a-vis birds.
Birds, yeah.
I'd like to know if I wanted to get a cat, how would I find one?
I don't know. A lot of people keep their cats in, but since mine don't do birds, I let them out.
So you just lucked out?
Well, they have a little cat door they can come in and out.
No, but I mean,
I lucked out in having.
yeah.
I wish I knew more. That's a good question. I wish I knew more. Two of mine are rushed. They were. My neighbor found them as kittens by the side of the road. Somebody threw them out of a car. They're Russian blues. So maybe the breed has. It would be worth looking into, but
Yeah.
I don't think people. I mean. Very few people ask that question. They just say, no cats, or keep your cats always indoors. Or
Right,
something.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, interestingly, a number of animals specialize. Fishers, who everybody thinks eats your cat. Most of the time what ate your cat was an automobile. There's been studies done on this, and they get run over by cars. The other thing that happens when they're out is they fights with other cats, and they get feluke and things like that. But fishers do specialize, and it's known that some of them do specialize in cats. And a lot of them won't touch a cat. So it's apparently a common thing. The other thing is, to keep your cat in, you can enjoy a cat that has a good life inside. There's videos that they can watch of fish and birds, and they're fascinated by this. Have you seen, your cats will watch.
We had the cat videos, and they love them. And they love them, just like us. It's the subject matter.
Another unrelated question, if I could. I just wanted you to comment on animal studies. Have you noticed an increase in universities of animal studies, field of animal?
You mean ethology?
Well,
The study of animal behavior?
yeah. Well, there's a field now, as I understand it, of animal studies that's interdisciplinary. So you have literature, animals and literature across the discipline. Just wondering if you knew anything about that.
I'm ignorant.
I would say that there were, I don't have any figures, and I'm not sure, but it would appear to me that animal studies have been going on since, I don't know, but the numbers may not have increased, but I think the subject matter has increased now in do animals think and feel. As Sarah was saying, people actually, even Darwin knew that they thought and felt. But for some reason, the scientific community took the opposite side, and Franz de Waal has invented a new word called anthropodenial, which means presenting an animal as if it did not have human characteristics.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah, it is. And I think that
His work is true.
I think that more of the studies are toward what Franz de Waal would like to see. And, yeah. In fact, I'm sure of that. There are a lot more studies. Now it's becoming a good subject.
Right.
Where you can actually find something that somebody else hasn't found before. Like the things in the blood or whatever. Science better education than I do.
It seems to be essential that field be developed if we're going to have any hope of saving the earth, because without that compassion, we just don't get it.
Thank you. That's exactly right.
That's exactly the way to end this program. Thank you so much for this great work.